Hi, and welcome to Dundee Covenant Church. Today we're talking about Psalm 85. And in Psalm 85, there's a cry to restore or be returned, for God to return and restore. The psalm begins by declaring some great things about God. It begins by saying that God has been gracious to his people. He's forgiven them. He's covered over their sins. All these words have to do with God's forgiveness and his grace that's been experienced by these people. They know of this in the past. You have been there and you have done that, God. But then the prayer shifts a little bit. It shifts into the place of discouragement, wondering, where are you now? Are you still angry with us? Now, a lot of people have a lot of different ideas about the anger of God. Some, as they read that, might think of that as a primitive idea of a bunch of nomads thousands of years ago that wrote in a book and really didn't know God very well. You might hear that from time to time. Others might have an overview of God's anger and think that he's angry at everything. And oftentimes the reason that we struggle or even try to help understand when the Bible talks about God's anger is that we oftentimes have irrational or very lose-it type episodes when we think of anger. Maybe a really angry dad that's punching holes in the wall or losing it and screaming at the top of his lungs. Maybe a mother that snaps her fingers and slaps or hits. And oftentimes violence even times comes out of these places of anger. So it's hard for us to kind of sort out what is actually good of God and right for him to be angry with, rightly so, and what's just human anger that's really brokenness and oftentimes just basically because I didn't get my way or get my goal. The psalm speaks of God being a forgiving God, but also speaks of him being angry. Why would God be angry? Surely he's not an angry God just around kicking the ground and looking for places that he can express his strength. That's not the heart of God. That's not what the scriptures speak to. But don't miss, throughout the Old Testament and the New, that God's righteous wrath and anger is truly part of who he is. Doesn't define who he is, but as an expression of his love and truth and justice, it is. And no matter how scary that might be, or how frustrating it might be to try to understand it completely, we can know that the anger of God is actually right. And it's appropriate, always appropriate. And this psalmist knows that. But the psalmist uses 5 different words from verse 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 different words for anger. There's vexation, overwhelmed. There's furiousness. There is a settled anger as well. All these words are speaking to the response to these people who have gone away from him. Remember that the theme in this psalm is return or restore. We're going to see that. And that's actually the initial prayer and actually the end prayer of where this psalm's going. But before we get going, we cannot miss the tension of the passage. The tension that you and I often live in is that we have rebelled against God. And the tension that we live in is that we understand his grace is extended to us, but we also understand there's seasons and times when there may be surrounding situations that point us to ways in which we have actually offended and continually walk in opposition to God. God loves us way too much to allow that to happen very long. He cares too much for me and for you to allow us to continue to live in a way that is not in line with him, that doesn't honor the relationship he desires out of us. And there's anger that comes when we do selfish acts that hurt God and other people for our own benefit, and in the end actually destroy ourselves. You may be wondering why I'm here. I'm sitting here at one of my favorite places. This is out at the Abbey. I remember the first day I came out and I saw when they had leveled this hill. It used to be full of pine trees as well as these oak trees. And my heart sank because I saw this clearing and saw Why would you do that? I thought they had there was some other reasons, but as I got to listen and understand what the monks and the community here was desiring, what they were desiring was that they would actually restore and return to the ground it's the oak trees that were present here early on. The pine trees that are in this space were not original here, but the oak trees were. And the oak trees are what they're trying to cultivate at this time. And so in an effort to have greater oak trees, and in that soil and making a forest of oak trees, they had to cut down and clear these trees. At first it seemed very mean, very wrong, but in reality it was for restoration, return. This psalmist knows in the spiritual history of Israel, it's happened where God has done things intentionally or used people or countries to help them return back, to draw them back. And that is what's going on here. God's anger, his righteous anger, is being experienced at some level, and what they're asking for is mercy and grace. And we'll see how the psalm continues in a few moments with that. This is our family dog named Chestnut. One characteristic about Chestnut is that he loves chocolate, as all of our family members do. His first year, he broke into our pantry and he got my daughter Emma's chocolate bunny for Easter. And he ate it, and ate almost his body weight, or at least half his body weight. He wasn't very big at that time. Ate a lot of chocolate, and that chocolate almost killed him. We were up all night. He was whimpering, crying. His body was rejecting this stuff that he thought he loved. And we'd given him some things so he would throw up. And as he threw up, he walked away at first from that chocolate mush on the ground. But before we could get it cleaned up, guess what this dog did? It returned to its chocolate vomit. Gross. So gross. I'm like, what are you thinking, dog? This is our Chestnut. But it reminded me, in Proverbs 26:11 it says, as a dog returns to its vomit, so a fool returns to its folly. Now fools, in Psalms and in Proverbs and other wisdom literature, isn't just someone that's foolish and forgetful and may have overlooked something. It's not so much an intellectual term. It has more to do with moral decisions. A fool is a person who's ordering their life around other things than of God. A fool is a person that gets sucked into the weak and quickly passing pleasures that actually turn back to destroy the person. The question in the passage is, what will restore us and what will destroy us? If you'll notice, throughout the first part of this psalm, and actually the theme of the psalm is to be restored. But that Hebrew word for restore also means return. And so it has a double meaning. It means God return to us, God restore us. It has an assumption that when God does return, or God shows up, what God does, he restores when he shows up. The irony, though, of the passage is, if you remember it, if you look down, it says in verse 7, the prayer, show us your steadfast love, O Lord, and grant us your salvation. Let me hear what God the Lord will speak, for he will speak peace to his people, to his saints, the holy ones, the ones he's made holy. But hear this phrase, hear this warning. But may they not return again to their folly. The cry of the psalmist is, restore or return to me, O God. And yet God uses that same word, ironically, that as they are in relationship with God and have spoken peace and are experiencing his grace, that they would not return to the folly that destroyed them in the first place. A lot of things I think about when I think about Chestnut. One of those things is that he returned to his vomit once. And I think that the way in which he did that toward his chocolate may be the very same temptations you and I may face as we return to whatever that folly is. But may we never forget that as God returned and restored us, that calls us not to return to the things that will destroy us. Harvest time in the Middle East, that was the best time. As I eat this blueberry from Oregon, and since it's berry season in Oregon, it reminds me how much that God, in a tangible way, meets us. It gives us things that we can't even imagine oftentimes or forget to thank him for. The psalmist, as they're dealing with the earlier psalm, moves then now at verse 9 and speaks about how surely, for sure, God is faithful. God is plentiful. God is the one who loves and lavishes with all of his characteristics on those who fear him or revere him, the ones that love him. He begins playfully to speak about using, again, land as a place of imagination where God's characteristics spring up and become almost a utopia. They're very attentive to land, to tangible ways God has shown his grace to them. In an ancient world, land was so important because it was identity. This is where I am. This is what I know. And from those places, the context of the world in which they know, they experience God's grace. They've experienced that Hesed love, the steadfast love, and his righteousness, and his faithfulness, and his peace. And they expect it to be in the future. And they expect that the land, that the harvest that they're working with right now, and the blueberry field we're in now, but probably other types of fields in the Middle East that they were harvesting at this time probably, was reminding them tangibly in ways they could throw in their mouth and chew on that God was good and that he's faithful. I wonder if there's places today, as we ask this question, are there places that you need to be reminded of God's faithfulness in tangible ways? The psalmist says that the glory of God was shown on the earth, in the dwelling place of the earth. That sounds very odd to us because we're not nearly as land-based. But if we translate this psalm into our own language, into our own experiences, in the present day, we might be able to understand that we're asking God in a tangible way to show His grace, His hesed love, to show His mercy and His faithfulness. And it's my hope that He answers that prayer for you.